contributions you've made here. Senator Sanders.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. A budget is not just a list of numbers. It really speaks to the priorities of our nation and what we are about as a people. In my view, in recent history, year after year, what this budget, the budget of the federal government, has reflected are the needs of the wealthiest people in this country and the largest corporations. And I want to congratulate you, Mr. Chairman, for beginning to turn that process around. I think we have a long way yet to go. But this budget, obviously, more than any in recent history at least, is beginning to reflect the needs of ordinary Americans and not just the wealthiest people in our country. Mr. Chairman, I have heard a lot of discussion about how great the economy is in charts, and we've had people from the administration coming up here. And I think we had the Secretary of the Treasury telling us, in fact, that this economy was just marvelous, just marvelous. And yet the reality is that all over our country, millions of people are working longer hours for lower wages. There is a widespread perception that no matter how much the administration talks about how great the economy is doing, what ordinary people know is that the middle class is shrinking, poverty is increasing, the gap between the rich and the poor is growing wider, and that while ordinary people are struggling to keep their heads above water, the wealthiest people in this country have never had it so good. And we need a budget that speaks to ordinary Americans and not just millionaires and billionaires. In America today, we are seeing for the last 5 years, median income for working-age families declining, more and more people losing their health insurance, more and more people in the United States of America going hungry in the United States of America. Middle-class families can't afford the outrageously high cost of college education. Just spoke to a woman yesterday from Vermont, 4-year college, $40,000 in debt for going to college. The Mortgage Bankers Association has just told us that that we now have the highest level in nearly 4 decades of foreclosures. We have 3 million fewer American workers today with pension coverage than before President Bush took office. So while the middle class is struggling, while family farmers in my state and in the state of New Hampshire and all over this country being forced off of the land, the reality is that the upper 1% of families in our country have not had it so good since the 1920s. According to Forbes magazine, the collective net worth of the wealthiest 400 Americans increased by $120 billion last year to $1.25 trillion. 400 families. This is an issue that has to be addressed. Middle class struggling, poverty increasing, a handful on top with unbelievable wealth. Now, why have I raised this information? Because it is important within the context of a budget. What is the reality that we are trying to deal with? And in my view, the reality is that the time is long overdue to address the needs of the middle class and working families. Frankly, I think the President's budget that was presented to this Congress is an embarrassment. Healthcare crisis getting worse. He wants to cut back on Medicare and Medicaid, inadequately fund the CHIP program. Every other industrialized country on earth provides health care to all people. We can't even provide health care to our children. This is a national disgrace. I don't have to elaborate what's going on to the veterans. I know the chairman talked about it earlier. We have tens of thousands of veterans who can come back from Iraq wounded. More are going to come back with PTSD, with traumatic brain injury. We do not have the resources to take care of them. That was just a study that came out yesterday. This budget begins to address that crisis. Inadequate funding for special education from the President's budget. Property taxes all over America going up. We're not keeping the promises we made. Inadequate funding for special ed. But while, under the President's budget, we can't address the needs of working families, low-income people, the middle class, oh my goodness, gee whiz, we do have $739 billion available for tax cuts for households earning more than $1 million per year over the next decade. Part of the President's budget calls for the complete elimination of the estate tax, a tax which now applies only to the wealthiest 0.3%. 0.3%. 99.7% of American families will not gain one nickel from the estate tax. Oh, but yes, one family, the Walton family that owns Walmarts, oh yeah, they will gain $32 billion in tax relief for one family when the estate tax is repealed if the president gets his way. I personally will do everything I can to make sure that that day does not happen. But that is in the president's budget. Cutbacks for the needs of working families and the poor and huge tax breaks for billionaires is what the president's budget is really about. Now, while the budget resolution prepared by Chairman Conrad that we will be debating today is far from perfect, it is much more responsive to the needs of ordinary Americans than the president's. Instead of cutting back on the educational needs of this country, this budget resolution provides over $6 billion more than the president's request for education, including significant increases for Pell Grants, Head Start, Title I, and special ed, etc. This is a budget that begins to address the needs of our veterans. But, Mr. Chairman, I think that over the long term, we can and must do much better in establishing our budgetary priorities than this budget does. This is a good start, but in my view, we've got a long way to go. And in my view, what we need to do, and what I did last week in introducing the National Priorities Act, is pretty simple. This is my view, probably not my friend's view from New Hampshire. But I think when we have a crisis of the middle class, when poverty is increasing, I think we say to the very wealthiest people in this country, you have been given huge tax breaks, it's time to rescind it. Our legislation rescinds tax breaks for the wealthiest 1%. And you know what else we do? We take a hard look at the Pentagon. You know, everyone wants to take a look at all kinds of programs. I'm for that. There's waste, fraud in every program that we have. But you know what? There's waste and fraud and mismanagement in the Pentagon as well. We can squeeze $60 billion there. We raise $130 billion, 30 for debt to lower the deficit, and $100 billion to address the needs of the middle class. Mr. Chairman, let me just conclude by raising one point. You have, in this budget, been extremely generous, and I think this is the most generous budget that our veterans community will have seen in many, many years. There are a few concerns that I have remaining in that, and that is there is about $252 million that I think left that I would like to see added to a variety of programs that I know that you would support. So I hope that we can discuss this. The overall veterans budget is very strong. You've gone a very long way in accommodating what the Veterans Committee, of which I'm a member, want. There are a few details that I hope we can work out. If not, I will be interested in offering an amendment. But once again, this is a step in the right direction, and I thank you very much for you and your staff's very hard work.
I thank the senator.